So hey guys, welcome to my video. Welcome to my home today. I'm going to show you two of my bucks that I've got. Here, this is a Georgia deer. I killed this deer in Macon County, Georgia. And I killed this deer down in the Withlacoochee Swamp. This is a Florida deer and this is a Georgia deer. I'm not going to try and convince you that this is a great big old buck. He's a pretty decent buck, I guess. And this deer is a great Florida deer. This is probably my best Florida deer. I killed them both on private land. The difference between these two deer is I killed this deer in the vicinity of a game feeder. I killed this deer way down in the Withlacoochee Swamp. No game feeders anywhere. So I just wanted to kind of touch base and talk about game feeders. If you're going to lease a piece of private land in Florida to hunt on, or you have a piece of private land, you would put a game feeder on it. Florida law requires that you put your game feeder up 6 months before the season starts. So if you wanted to hunt in October this coming year, you would need to put your feeder up now and then maintain it. All the way maintaining it means leave it out there, keep the batteries charged up, keep feed in it, and again, designate that spot as a feeding area. It's legal to hunt hogs and deer off that feeder when the season comes in by any method of take, whether it would be archery or muzzleloader or modern gun. You could hunt over that feeder throughout the whole season. Same goes for Georgia. Like I said, I killed this deer in the vicinity of a feeder. I was set up in my tree stand in some woods and I could look through the trees and see that feeder. It's really hard to turn down an invitation to hunt over a feeder on private land, whether it be in Florida or in Georgia. I would advise you that if you wanted to get invited to a piece of private land and somebody invited you to hunt over a feeder, that you take them up on that offer. You're only cheating yourself. Let's talk about wildlife feeders. Let's talk about perspective for a moment. A lot of non-hunters, if you were to say to them that we hunt over feeders, we attract wild game out of the woods and have them come to a feeder, and then we shoot them as they feed on corn that we put out for them, their perspective might have a negative light to that. They might have a negative response to that. But their perspective is coming from a non-hunter's perspective. I killed this deer probably 3-4 seasons in, hunting in them same stretch of woods. I killed this deer same way, 3 or 4 seasons in, right? And there was nothing easy about it. I just happened to be able to see the feeder. There just happened to be some does feeding at the feeder. And this buck was looking for does, so he came through the trees and I was able to harvest him. But my perspective as a hunter is that I work hard to fulfill a task. And that task is to harvest an animal. My task might even be to harvest a superior animal. That'd be really hard to do if I didn't have those feeders set up, right? Especially in Georgia. We have real thick, dense woods. You can't see in those woods. Deer bury themselves into that cover. And without some attractant to draw them out, it would be almost impossible to shoot one. You could hear them running and grunting and carrying on inside those woods, but you'd never see them. So the state of Georgia finally allowed us to start using game feeders. I enjoy hunting over feeders, and I think that can be a real asset. So let's talk about tactics. Let's talk about assets. If you were to define hunting from my perspective and from your perspective, I have to believe that if you're watching this video, you're probably a hunter. You're probably interested in hunting. We need to talk about the ethics of hunting over a feeder and whether or not it should be acceptable. Whatever your perspective is, I know that there are some states up in further north that you're not allowed to hunt over feeders, and then I know there's a lot of places in Kansas where you can hunt over feeders, and as you come further south it becomes more widely acceptable, and in Georgia it's almost unheard of not to hunt over a feeder. So depending on where you're from, can change your perspective. But my perspective would be that if you were to define the act of hunting as a hunter, it's a collection. Let's say that hunting is a collection of tactics at our disposal, legal tactics, okay, that were within the guidelines of the law in order to fulfill a task. What's the task? To harvest a mature animal, whether it be in a scrub where you can't legitimately see the animals because they don't come out of that scrub, and we hunt over an area that's got a feeder, or down in a swamp where there's no feeders at all. I've experienced both, and I've been successful at both. But if you take those tactics of hunting, whether it be rifle, bow, crossbow, or muzzleloader, tree stands, right? ATVs, tripod stands, food plots, grunt tubes, attractants, rattling horns, all of these, and again, feeders, are tactics to fulfill a task. And that task is to harvest a mature animal. I know that there are some places here in Florida that if you didn't run dogs, okay, it'd be very difficult to kill a deer out of some stretches of woods. There are some deer that live in those woods that never see a human being at all. Without the use of dogs, some of those deer just simply go unhunted. So dog hunting is allowed. Your perspective about dog hunting might be different if you're from the north. But here in the south, dog hunting is a tradition. So it is with feeder hunting in Texas or feeder hunting in Florida. It's widely used because the deer hunting is so difficult and so hard and the cover is so dense that it's widely used as a tactic, okay, to harvest animals that we want to harvest, that we select to harvest. Now, if I owned a piece of property and I wanted to kill a mature deer on that property, and I set up a feeder, that feeder would allow me to sit from a distance with a high-powered rifle and watch that feeder. Now, if I want to kill a deer, I wanted to kill a mature deer, I'd be able to select the deer that come to that feeder, whichever buck I wanted, and I'd wait. It would just open up the opportunity for me to harvest a mature deer, and I think that's a legitimate reason for feeders, as well as supplementally feeding. But there are some drawbacks. Okay, there are some drawbacks to feeders. One of which it tends to group up animals. Some biologists say that having feeders is detrimental to some wildlife because they kind of feed in the same vicinity where they might defecate. And I get that. I understand that. Turkeys come and feed under a feeder. It also might attract unwanted game. It might draw unwanted game out of the woods that we don't want. Even putting them at risk, right? Black bears. If a black bear starts coming to your feeder, it can become a nuisance, right? Next thing you know, the thing is toppling it over or climbing a tree and trying to get at the corn or the feed that's inside that feeder. So, it can be a real challenge if you've got black bears in the area to have a feed station and not have the whole family of bears showing up there on a regular basis. So that could be one of the drawbacks. Another drawback could be chronic wasting disease. If you group up deer around a feeder, that you could spread disease, unwanted disease, and it can be a problem. Not everyone has these issues when it comes to feeders. We don't have those issues here in Florida. It's not saying that we wouldn't or couldn't, but we're not having those issues these days. So far, so good, right? And in a lot of places in Texas and Kansas and Georgia where they are allowed to run feeders and hunt over feeders, that there's not been a real problem. But I wanted to share with you my thoughts on wildlife feeders. I enjoy hunting over a wildlife feeder. Now, if some people kind of get a little bent out of shape when it comes to wildlife feeders. Again, it comes back to perspective. If you're new to hunting, and a lot of you are, I read the comments on YouTube, and I know that some of you are new. And if somebody invites you to come hunt on their private property, and you heard someone on TV or you heard someone on Facebook put down the idea of hunting over a feeder, I would counsel you to think it through before you tell somebody that you're not interested in doing it. I had a friend of mine come and say to me, he said, I'd rather spend all day sitting over a feeder than sitting at work. He says, I still love hunting a feeder, and I have to agree with that. He said that he enjoys his time watching a feeder, seeing lots of animals. You don't have to shoot every animal you see. You don't have to shoot any particular smaller bucks. You can be selective on what you shoot. So if you're invited on private land and you're invited to sit over a feeder, I would counsel you to do it. It gives you a great opportunity to observe a lot of animals. You can learn a lot from watching deer and hogs and turkeys over a feeder. So those are my thoughts on feeders. If you have a private lease or you have private land and you want to put a feeder on it, you got the green light from me. You just, in order to stay guidelines of the law, you have to do it now. You have to get prepared now. Go clear you out a spot, go buy yourself a feeder, and then maintain that feeder all the way up till hunt season, and it'll bring you some good success. Like I said, I killed this deer. In the vicinity of a feeder, there were deer feeding at that feeder, and it drew this buck out of the thick cover, and I saw him. He was probably about 100 yards away. And a funny thing about this buck, when I shot him, when he had stopped, he was chasing a doe, and when he had stopped, I was quite certain that he was looking right at me, even though he was like 125 yards away. He was looking right in my direction, and I shot him straight on. Put the crosshairs right on the chest, and I let that bullet rip. And I went down and looked where he was standing. I only saw one little old spot of blood. I spent about 2 hours looking for this deer, and he had run down a game trail that had been leading to that feeder. So I walked down that trail, and I saw a little spot there on the left where a vine, one of those vines that are like barbed wire. They're just really barbed and strong. Well, that vine was broken in two. Kind of let me know that my deer had run down in that direction. He had plowed through that vine, and I walked down there, and I found him laying there after about a 2-hour search. And when I got to looking at him, I noticed that the bullet went through his lungs. It went through sideways. That I don't know how that happened. The way I recollect the shot was straight on in the chest, and somehow when I found my deer, he was shot through the lungs. So how's that happen? I don't know. There are just some things about the hunt that we don't remember, and they're kind of blacked out. And maybe he turned, and I don't remember him turning. I shot him behind the shoulder. I made a perfect shot on the deer, and he only ran 50 or 60 yards down through the thicket. And there he was laying there. I've had no blood trail at all. The only thing that gave his presence and where he was away was the fact that the vine was busted. And I was real happy when I found him. I was real happy with this deer. I really enjoyed the feeling I got when I found him, because I had fallen into a state of despair. When you fall into that feeling of despair, when you feel like you know, all right. And it was early in the morning when I shot the deer. It was probably 8:15. I'd been there long before daylight, and when I found him, it was just a joyous feeling, man. You just can't really describe it. And this deer, this is a Sumter County buck. I killed this buck in Sumter County, Florida, and he's a Florida deer, and I killed him in the Withlacoochee State Forest on private land. And I guess if you were to say points, count points, he's a 10 point. He's got a kicker right here that's broken. He's got this little kicker here. He's got nice long tines. He's a beautiful buck. Robin Kirkland in Leesburg mounted this deer for me, and Masters Taxidermy in Ocoee, Masters mounted this one. and I'm real happy with both of these mounts. I like to use different taxidermists from time to time because they kind of have their own style of doing it, and then once you become once you become a person with an educated eye, you see different attributes for the taxidermist and the deer, and I just love these bucks. I love having them, and they mean so much to me. But I got off work early one Friday afternoon, and I drove to my hunting spot and got in my stand, and I saw this deer down in the swamp. I could see him walking through the trees, and he was a good 150 yards away, and then I lost track of him. In fact, when I first saw him, all I saw was his rump, and I remember thinking to myself, man, that deer had a big rump. He must have made a horseshoe turn, because then he came in, and I shot him at about 50 yards, and I shot him through the lungs, and he ran back down to where the spot where I originally saw him, and I saw him go down. And when I went and found him, it was great. I knew he was laying there, and just walked back there and get him. And anyway, he has this tine here that's broke off and grew sideways, and I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know what happened to this. He broke off this. He must have broke that off right there, and then it grew back. It healed and grew sideways. I thought that was kind of interesting. But again, if you get the opportunity to hunt, and they've got feeders on that property, you might want to think about taking advantage of it, because it's legal, right? And as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't feel guilty about killing a deer, even though there are some people who will try and make you feel guilty. Remember, everyone has their own perspective, and my perspective is that it's just another tool we can use. You can't use feeders on public land. I hunt a lot of public land. If I get invited to sit on a feeder, you can bet, after years and years and years of hunting on public land, I'm going to sit on a feeder from time to time and enjoy my time. I hope you enjoy your time too. And again, these are my bucks. I love them, and I love making these videos. I love showing you my deer. I love sharing my thoughts. Comment, let me know what you think, and if you like the content here on the channel, I would encourage you to subscribe. I'll keep doing them as long as I keep getting people that like it and people that subscribe. I'll keep making the videos until I just run out of stuff to say. All right, love you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.